All right, Chrissy, thank you. President Trump is planning to decertify the Obama administration's nuclear deal with Iran. Political professor Ric Epps joining us this morning with more. Rick, good morning.
Morning, Raul.
Okay, explain why and what does he hope to accomplish here?
Well, allegedly what he hopes to accomplish is a few things. One, he's trying to contend with Iran's ballistic missile program, which is non-nuclear. He's also trying to mitigate the sunset clauses in the nuclear deal so that in case Iran wants to start developing nuclear technology, he'd like to see that occur. Then he's also wants tougher inspections, which is sort of unusual since there's already inspections in place.
Is there domestic or international support for this? Because everybody already kind of had that agreement and that's why it came to be. So is there support to undo it?
Well, it's interesting. Not really. In fact, if you look domestically, you'll see that the U.S. diplomats and U.S. officials have all supported this deal. You also have our European allies have supported it. The UN watchdog team, which is actually in Iran to make sure that they're in compliance, supports this, and they have been, by the way. And then also Secretary of Defense, as well as the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, have all supported this agreement. I mean, it's not a perfect agreement, but it's a good agreement, and that's why to see the president trying to take this action of decertification is sort of mind-boggling, because it really potentially can unravel. It may have some serious long-term implications. Yeah,
I was going to ask you about those serious long-term implications. What are the risks if that happens?
Well, there's several. I mean, certainly we can look at the legacy of what happened during the Bush administration, but let's look at the first step. The first thing that potentially happens is that you radicalize the Iranian leadership inside. So you have a country that is predominantly pro-West. But if you start to push them, then all of a sudden you've got the people start to become more radicalized, which means they end up electing another Ahmadinejad, who they had, during the Bush administration, who was very anti-West. And then you start to devolve the country again into this East-West rivalry, and then they could pursue their own ballistic missile program again. So, and then also it creates instability for Israel and the region. So there really is no logic path to justify this decertification that he's planning to pursue this week.
It's like issues on all sides of the world here. Moving to North Korea now, the president continuing with the tweets about North Korea and Kim Jong-un and calling him names, et cetera, et cetera. What's going on there? Are these veiled threats on the president's part? It's just back and forth with Kim Jong-un?
It's almost one-sided. It's like telling your mama jokes, right? It's really disturbing though, because for a couple of reasons. One is, and most importantly, I think, is just that Trump doesn't. I don't think he really grasps the idea of his words. Like the president of the United States, when he says something, it means something, even if it's coming through tweets. And and Kim Jong-un is not like his father. He understands the nuance of American politics. He gets it. So when we have made very bellicose threats or statements about what we're going to do or what we might do, this man understands that any actions that he really literally commits in the region, let's say he wants to launch a missile at Seoul, which is basically 35 miles from the demilitarized zone. Well, I mean, he knows to do that is going to result in a catastrophic event in his own country. He's not trying to kill himself. But here's what the danger is. The biggest danger are what I call the unintended consequences. And these are the consequences that occur when you start to escalate the issue. So if North Korea feels threatened by Trump's comments, or if they start to believe that he really might take action, then that might precipitate them taking action. We call it the security dilemma. And in that case, then things can spiral out of control very quickly. And there are many people who are worried about this. And I mean, even his own staff and within his own leadership are concerned about his commentary with regard to tweeting and the things he's saying. It just, first, it's not very presidential, and secondly, it just continues to pour oil on a flame that doesn't need to be borne out anymore. And the last thing I'll say is that this issue is about diplomacy. This is when you need to have.
Exactly. I was going to ask you about that. Is that missing from all of this? Is the president listening to anyone? They've all told him to stop with the tweeting about Kim Jong-un.
Boy, I tell you, it seems
diplomacy.
Like I know. It looks like he's just listening to himself, and this is one of the dangerous parts. His ego, supersedes talking to the people who are not only the experts, I would call them the big boys and the adults in the room about how to deal with this issue. There are many experts. We have experts in our country who have spent their careers on North Korea who he's not even listening to in terms of how to proceed. And it's frightening because, you know, again, he's destabilizing a region that can't afford to be destabilized any worse than it is. And yes, diplomacy isn't always perfect, and no one likes the fact that sometimes you have to lose a little to win a little. But the truth is, look at what the consequence would be if you didn't do that. And we can't afford that consequence. But now setting up two potential war fronts between there and Iran could really be a huge mess for us and for our allies, and that's a problem.
Political professor Ric Epps, we thank you for your time this morning.
Good to see you, Raul.
All right, Rick, thank you. Still ahead on